Okay, so we are reading the Celestine Prophecy by James Redfield. We are in the chapter Engaging the Flow, page 183 of my book and page 101 of the PDF.
A surge of impatience rose up within me. After making good time for over 3 hours, I now sat at a crossroads, unable to decide between two particular routes.
So now he has come to a crossroad and he doesn't know which way to take. Okay, now in the previous section, what Father Carl was saying, that when you engage the flow, the thing that is right for you starts to brighten up. Okay, so now he has come to a point where he doesn't know which way to go. So now what's he going to do?
Nikit, can I share something here?
Yeah, please.
So it's not from the text, but it's related to the Monroe meditation. So Megha, that's my daughter, she had done the excursion, and we were in Rome, and she had precisely half an hour to finish her shopping and come. So she reached this crossroad, and she actually found the energy किस लेन में shops है, and उसको वो energy मिल गया, and वो इस लेन में घुसकर अपना shopping करके आ गई.
Yeah, so it happens like that. Where you need to go will brighten up, provided
Yeah.
you're aware of it. That's all.
To my left was one possibility. Judging from the map, this road bore north along the edge of the mountains for 100 miles, then turned sharply east towards Iquitos. The other route led to the right and maintained an eastern angle through the jungle to the same destination. I took a deep breath and tried to relax, then quickly checked the rearview mirror. No one was in sight. In fact, I hadn't seen anyone, no traffic, no locals walking in over an hour. I tried to shake off a rush of anxiety. I knew I had to relax and stay connected if I expected to make the right decision.
Okay. So over here, what happened? This is very important. I knew I had to relax and stay connected if I expected to make the right decision. So what is he implying? That I need to stay on right side of the grid. I need to be connected. I need to be in equanimity so that I am in balance and then take the right decision. If I'm not in balance, I can never take the right decision.
I focused on the scene. The jungle route to my right progressed between a group of large trees. Several huge outcroppings of rock punctuated the ground around them. Most were encircled by large tropical bushes. The other route through the mountains seemed comparatively bare. One tree grew in that direction, but the remainder of the landscape was rocky with very little plant life.
So now So now over here, when you normally look at both the routes, okay, the route with more plant life would generally seem to be more attractive than a barren field. Now, I don't know which one he's going to take because I don't remember. But the fact is that you're not looking at something from your normal 3D consciousness. Okay. You're shifting your state of consciousness and then observing which one of the routes is brighter for you.
I looked to the right again and tried to induce a love state. The trees and bushes were a rich green. I looked to the left and tried the same procedure. Immediately, I noticed a patch of flowering grass that bordered the road. The blades of grass were pale and spotty, but the white flowers viewed together created a unique pattern into the distance. I wondered why I hadn't noticed the flowers earlier. They now seemed to almost glow. I broadened my focus to include everything in that direction. The small rocks and brown patches of gravel seemed extraordinarily colorful and distinct. Hues of amber and violet and even dark red ran through the entire scene.
Okay, so now what happened? Now, first he was looking with his normal state of consciousness. As soon as he got that love energy into him, he shifted his state of consciousness. Now the way that he was viewing things totally shifted. Okay, so everything started seeming brighter. Stuff that he did not notice previously, he started noticing. So that's what happens when you go into an altered state, your vision starts to expand.
I glanced back to the right to the trees and bushes. Although beautiful, they now paled in comparison to the other route. But how could that be, I thought. Initially, the road to the right seemed more attractive. Glancing back to the left, my intuition strengthened. The richness of shape and color amazed me. I was convinced. I started the truck and headed to the left, sure of the correctness of my decision. The road was bumpy with rocks and ruts. As I bounced along, my body felt lighter. My weight was centered on my buttocks, and my back and neck were straight. My arms were holding the steering wheel but were not resting on it.
Okay, so now what happened? As soon as you engage the flow, you start becoming more energized, you start feeling lighter, you start feeling that yes, the decision was a correct one. So the ambiguity, जो दुविधा रहता है mind में, that goes out of the window the moment you start engaging the flow.
For 2 hours, I drove without incident, nibbling from the food basket Father Karl had packed, and again seeing no one. The road meandered up and down, one small foothill after another. At the top of one hill, I observed two older cars parked to my right. They were pulled far off to the side of the road in a stand of small trees. I could see no occupants and assumed the vehicles were abandoned. Ahead, the road turned sharply to the left and circled downward into a wide valley. From the peak, I could see for several miles. I stopped the truck abruptly. Halfway across the valley, 3 or 4 military vehicles sat along both sides of the road. A small group of soldiers stood among the trucks. A chill ran through me. That was a roadblock. I backed off the crest and pulled my vehicle behind two large rocks, then got out and walked back to the overlook to again observe the activity in the valley. One vehicle was driving away in the opposite direction. Suddenly, I heard something behind me. I turned around quickly. It was Phil, the ecologist I had met at Vicien. He was equally shocked. Matt, what are you doing here? He asked as he rushed up to me. I'm trying to get to Iquitos, I said. His face was filled with anxiety. So are we, but the government's getting crazy over this manuscript. We're trying to decide whether to risk passing through that roadblock. There are 4 of us. He nodded to his left. I could see several men through the trees. Why are you going to Iquitos? He asked. I'm trying to find Will. We got separated in Kula, but I heard he might be headed to Iquitos, looking for the rest of the manuscript. He looked horrified. He shouldn't be doing that. The military has prohibited anyone having copies. Didn't you hear what occurred at Vicient? Yes, some, but what did you hear? I wasn't there, but I understand the authorities rushed in and arrested everyone who had copies. All the guests were detained for questioning. Dale and the other scientists were taken away. No one knows what happened to them. Do you know why the government is so disturbed about the manuscript? I asked. No, but when I heard how unsafe it was getting, I decided to return to Iquitos for my research data and then to leave the country myself. I told him the details of what had happened to Bill and myself after leaving Vicient, especially the shooting on the ridge top. Damn, he said. And you're still fooling around with this thing? His statement jarred my confidence, but I said, look, if we do nothing, the government is going to suppress the manuscript completely. The world will be denied its knowledge, and I think the insights are important. Important enough to die for? He asked. The sound of vehicles attracted our attention. The trucks were driving across the valley towards us. Oh shit, he said. Here they come. Before we could move, we heard the sound of vehicles approaching from the other direction as well. They've surrounded us, Phil shouted. He looked panicked. I ran to the truck and dumped the basket of food into a small pack. I took the folders containing the manuscript and placed them in the pack as well, then thought better of it and pushed them under the seat instead. The sounds were growing louder, so I ran across the road to my right in the direction Phil had headed. Down the slope, I could see him and the other men huddled behind a group of rocks. I hid with them. My hope was that the military trucks would pass and keep going. My truck was out of sight. Hopefully, they would think, as I did, that the other cars were abandoned. The trucks approaching from the south arrived first and, to our horror, stopped even with the vehicles. Don't move, police, a voice shouted. We froze as several soldiers walked up from behind us. All were heavily armed and very cautious. The soldiers searched us thoroughly and took everything, then forced us to walk back to the road. There, dozens of soldiers were searching the vehicles. Phil and his companions were taken and placed in one of the military trucks, which quickly drove away. As he rode past me, I caught sight of him. He looked pale and ghostly. I was led on foot in the opposite direction and asked to sit near the crest of the hill. Several soldiers stood near me, each carrying an automatic weapon on his shoulder. Finally, an officer walked over and tossed the folders containing my copies of the insides on the ground at my feet. On top of them, he threw the keys to Father Carl's truck. Are these copies yours? He asked. I looked at him without answering. These keys were found on you, he said. Inside the vehicle, we found these copies. I ask you again, are they yours? I don't think I'll answer until I see a lawyer, I stammered. The remark brought a sarcastic smile to the officer's face. He said something to the other soldiers and walked away. The soldiers directed me to one of the jeeps and into the front seat by the driver. Two other soldiers sat in the back seat, their weapons ready. Behind us, more soldiers climbed aboard a second truck. After a short wait, both vehicles headed north into the valley. Anxious thoughts filled my mind. Where were they taking me? Why did I put myself into this position? So much so, for the preparation the priests had given me, I hadn't lasted a day. Back at the crossroads, I had been so certain I had chosen the correct route. This route was the one most attractive. I was sure of it.
So
Where did I
now,
make my mistake?
so over here, although he found it more attractive, he took the road, but he got captured. But this is where we need to understand that going forward, when we start jacking into the flow, whichever road or path seems brighter, and we take it, when we are going on it, we may feel that, we've made a mistake. But at the end of the tunnel, you will find that those decisions were correct decisions because you actually reach your destination because of those decisions.
I took a deep breath and attempted to relax, wondering what would happen now. I would plead ignorance, I thought, and present myself as a misguided tourist, meaning no harm. I just got mixed up with the wrong people, I would say. Let me go home. My hands were resting in my lap. They were shaking slightly. One of the soldiers sitting behind me offered a canteen of water, and I took it, though I could not drink. The soldier was young, and when I handed the canteen back to him, He smiled without a trace of malice on his face. The image of Phil's panicked look flashed across my mind.
So
What
again,
would
he's got an intuition that fills my thing flash through his mind.
what would they do with him? The thought occurred to me that Phil on that hilltop had been a coincidence. What was its meaning? What would we have talked about had we not been interrupted? As it was, all I did was stress the manuscript's importance, and all he did was warn me about the danger here and counsel me to get out before being captured. Unfortunately, his advice had come too late.
So so again over here, now what is he's starting to think that if an incident happened, why did it happen? What was the coincidence with which it happened? What is the value that it's going to create in his life? So actually speaking, we should also start looking at these things ourselves to see what are the coincidences happening in our life and what is the meaning of those coincidences for us. So again, it all boils down to becoming aware.
For several hours, we rode without speaking. The terrain outside grew progressively more flat, the air warmed. At one point, the young soldier handed me an open can of sea rations, something like beef hash. But again, I couldn't force anything down. After sunset, the light faded quickly. I rode along without thought, staring straight ahead with the truck's headlights. Then I slipped into a restless sleep during which I dreamed of being in flight. I was running desperately from an unknown foe amid hundreds of huge bonfires, certain that somewhere was a secret key that would open the way to knowledge and safety. In the middle of one of the giant fires, I saw the key. I darted in to retrieve it. I jerked awake, sweating profusely. The soldiers glanced at me nervously. I shook my head and leaned against the truck's door. For a long time, I looked outside the side window, at the dark shapes of the landscape, fighting the urge to panic. I was alone and under guard, heading into blackness, and no one cared about my nightmares. About midnight, we pulled up to a large, dimly lit building constructed of cut stone and 2 stories high. We walked along a walkway past the front entrance and entered a side door. Steps led down to a narrow hall. The inner walls were also of stone, and the ceiling was constructed of large timbers and rough cut planks. Bare bulbs hanging from the ceiling lit our way. We walked through another door and then ran into an area of cells. One of the soldiers who had disappeared caught up with us and opened one of the cell doors and motioned for me to enter. Inside were 3 cots, a wooden table, and a vase of flowers. To my surprise, the cell was very clean. As I walked in, a young Peruvian, no more than 18 or 19 years old, looked at me meekly from behind the door. The soldier locked the door behind me and walked away. I sat down on one of the cots as the young man reached over and turned up an oil lamp. When the light hit his face, I noticed that he was an Indian.
So Indian, not as an Indian over there.
Do you speak English? I asked. Yes, some, he said. Where are we? Near Pulkapa. Is this a prison? No, everyone is here for questioning about the manuscript. How long have you been here? I asked. He looked up at me with shy brown eyes. 2 months. What have they done to you? They tried to make me disbelieve the manuscript and tell about others who have copies. How? By talking to me. Just talking? No threats? Just talking, he repeated. Have they said when they will let you go? No. I paused for a moment and he looked at me questioningly. Were you caught with copies of the manuscript? Yes. Were you? Yes. I live near here in an orphanage. My headmaster was teaching from the manuscript. He allowed me to teach the children. He was able to escape, but I was captured. How many insights have you seen? I asked. All that have been found, he said. You? I have seen all but the seventh and eighth insights. I had the seventh, but I didn't get a chance to read it before the soldiers showed up. The young man yawned and asked, Can we sleep now? Yea, I said absently. Sure. I laid on my cot and shut my eyes, my mind racing. What should I do now? How had I let myself be caught? Could I escape? I concocted several strategies and scenarios before I finally drifted off to sleep. Again, I dreamed vividly. I was searching for the same key, but this time I was lost in a deep forest. For a long time, I had been walking aimlessly, wishing for some sort of guidance. After a while, a huge thunderstorm came and flooded the landscape. During the deluge, I was washed down a deep ravine and into the river, which was flowing in the wrong direction and threatening to drown me. With all my might, I fought against the current, struggling for what seemed like days. Finally, I was able to pull myself from the torrent by clinging to the rocky shoreline. I climbed up the rocks and along the sheer cliffs that bordered the river, ascending higher and higher and into ever more treacherous areas. Although I had summoned all my willpower and expertise to negotiate the cliffs, at one point I found myself clinging perilously to the rock face, unable to proceed any further. I looked down at the terrain below me. In shock, I realized that the river I had been fighting flowed out of the forest and gently up to a beautiful beach and meadow. In the meadow, surrounded by flowers, was the key. Then I slipped and fell, screaming down and down until I hit the river and sank.
So again, a lot of drama in the dream. Okay. Now, any dream, we can actually interpret it. It's because it's the subconscious way of communicating with the conscious mind.
I sat up quickly in my cot, gasping for air. The young Indian, apparently already awake, walked over to me. What is wrong? He asked. I caught my breath and looked around, realizing where I was. I also noticed that the room had a window and that it was already light outside. Just a bad dream, I said. He smiled at me as though he was pleased at what I said. Bad dreams have the most important messages, he commented. Messages? I asked, getting up and putting on my shirt. He looked embarrassed at having to explain. The seventh insight talks of dreams, he said. What does it say about dreams? Sorry. It tells how to interpret dreams? Yes. What does it say about that? It says to compare the story of the dreams to the story of your life. I thought for a moment, unsure of what that instruction meant. What do you mean, compare stories? The young Indian could barely look me in the eye. Do you want to interpret your dream? I nodded and told him what I had experienced. He listened intently, then said, Compare parts of the story with your life.
So this is important, okay? Making comparisons and then developing a language of your dream also. So when we are going into altered states, we need to have a language for those altered spaces. When we have a dream and we want to get into dream interpretation, then also we need to develop our own language. Of course, there are certain archetypes and all that, but ultimately you have to make meaning out of the dream that you have had.
He listened intently, then said, "Compare parts of the story with your life." I looked at him. "Where do I start?" "At the beginning." "What are you doing at the beginning of the dream?" "I was searching for a key in a forest." "How did you feel?" "Lost." "Compare the situation to your real situation." "Maybe it does relate," I said. "I'm looking for some answers about this manuscript, and I'm damn sure feeling lost." "And what else is happening to you in real life?" he asked. "I've been caught," I said. "In spite of everything I've tried to do, I've been locked up. All I can hope for now is to talk someone into letting me go home." "You are struggling against being caught?" "Of course." "What happened next in the dream?" "I fought against the current." "Why?" "I began to pick on where he was headed because at the time I thought it would drown me." "And if you hadn't fought the water?" "It would have carried me to the key." "What are you saying? That if I don't fight against this situation, that I might still get the answers I want?" He looked embarrassed again. "I'm not saying anything. The dream is saying." I thought for a moment. Was this interpretation correct? The young Indian looked up at me, then asked, "If you had to experience the dream again, what would you do different?" "I wouldn't resist the water, even though it looked as though it might kill me. I would know better." "What is threatening you now?" "I guess the soldiers being detained." "So, what is the message to you?" "You think the message of the dream is to look at this capture positively?" He didn't answer, he only smiled. I was sitting on my cot leaning back against the wall. The interpretation excited me. If it was accurate, it would mean that I hadn't made a mistake at the crossroads after all, that this was all part of what should be happening.
Okay, so
The
now what
name.
happened over here? You think the message of the dream is to look at this capture positively. Okay, so now what is happening? They got captured. Now it can be a very bad thing at that point in time, but what the result will be, we don't know. That's why jacking into the flow and allowing things to manifest starts becoming very, very important.
"What is your name?" I asked. "Pablo," he said. I smiled and introduced myself, then briefly told him the story of why I was in Peru and what had happened. Pablo was sitting on his cot, his elbows resting on his knees. He had short, black hair and was very thin. "Why are you here?" he asked. "To find out about this manuscript," I replied. "Why specifically?" he asked again. "To find out about the seventh insight and to find out about some friends, Will and Marjorie, and I guess to find out why the church is so against the manuscript."
So now what is he doing here? Many times we have a upper purpose which looks apparent, but and many times there is a deeper purpose. So the idea here is if we are doing anything, we need to understand what is the deeper purpose as to why we are doing it, because that is the most accurate. Okay, now, now in wholeness or in core transformation, they are again attempting to do the same thing. That why are you here? What is the deeper purpose of what you are doing? In somatic intelligence also, the same thing is there. Where are you feeling it? What is happening? So that's the inquiry which takes place. So why are you here? Why are you doing it? What meaning does it have? These are the questions we need to keep asking ourselves.
"There are many priests here to talk to," he said. I thought about his statement for a moment, then asked, "What else does the seventh insight say about dreams?" Pablo told me that dreams come to tell us something about our lives that we are missing. Then he said something else, but instead of listening, I started to think about Marjorie. I could see her face clearly in my mind, and I wondered where she might be. Then I saw her running up to me, smiling.
So again, we need to listen. But even when we are listening, if something pops into our mind without our consciously thinking of it, then that becomes important.
Suddenly, I became aware that Pablo was no longer talking. I looked over at him. Sorry, my mind was wandering, I said. What were you saying? That is all right, he replied. What were you thinking about? Just a friend of mine. It was nothing. He looked as though he wanted to press the question, but someone was approaching the cell door. Through the bars, we could see a soldier sliding back the bolt lock. Time for breakfast, Pablo said. The soldier opened the door and motioned with his head for us to walk into the hall. Pablo led the way down the stone corridor. We proceeded to a stairway and up one flight of stairs to a small dining area. 4 or 5 soldiers stood at the corner of the room while several civilians, 2 men and a woman, waited in line to be served. I stopped, not believing my eyes. The woman was Marjorie. Simultaneously, she saw me and covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes. Her eyes opening wide with surprise. I glanced at her, smiling nonchalantly and saying something in Spanish. I followed Pablo as he led us across the room and to the end of the line. Marjorie was being served. The 2 other men took their trays to a table talking. Several times Marjorie gazed over and met my eyes, struggling not to say anything. After the second glance, Pablo guessed that we knew each other and looked at me questioningly. Marjorie carried her food to a table, and after being served, we walked over and sat with her. The soldiers were still talking among themselves, seemingly oblivious to our movements. God, I'm glad to see you, she said. How did you get here? I hid for a while with some priests, I replied. Then I left to find Will and was captured yesterday. How long have you been here? Since they found me on the ridge, she said. I noticed Pablo was looking at us intensely and I introduced him to Marjorie. I guessed that this must be Marjorie, he said. They talked briefly. Then I asked Marjorie, what else happened? Not much, she said. I don't even know why I am being detained. Every day I've been taken to one of the priests or to the one of the officers for questioning. They want to know who my contacts were at Vicient and if I know where any other copies are. Over and over again. Marjorie smiled and looked vulnerable, and when she did, I felt another strong attraction to her. She looked at me sharply out of the corner of her eyes. We both laughed quietly. A period of silence followed as we ate our food, and then the door opened and in walked a priest dressed formally. He was accompanied by a man appearing to be a high ranking military officer.
So
That's the
over
head
here
priest,
again,
Pablo said.
over here, Marjorie could see his energy field, and he realized that he could see her. She could see his field. Okay, and they had a laugh about it.
The officer said something to the soldiers who had snapped to attention, and then he and the priest walked across the room towards the kitchen. The priest looked directly at me, our eyes meeting for a long second. I looked away and took a bite of food, not wanting to attract attention. Both men continued through the kitchen and out a door there. Was that one of the priests you've talked to? I asked Marjorie. No, Marjorie said. I've never seen him. I know that priest, Pablo said. He arrived yesterday. His name is Cardinal Sebastian. I sat up straight. That was Sebastian? It sounds like you've heard of him, Marjorie said. I have, I replied. He's the main person behind the church's opposition to the manuscript. I thought he was at Father Sanchez's mission. Who is Father Sanchez? Marjorie asked. I was about to tell her when the soldier who had escorted us walked over to the table and motioned for Pablo and me to follow. Time for exercise, Pablo said. Marjorie and I looked at each other, her eyes revealed an inner anxiety. Don't worry, I said. I'll talk to you at the next meal. Everything will be fine. As I walked away, I wondered if my optimism was realistic. These people could make any of us disappear without a trace at any time. The soldier guided us into a short hall and through a door that led to an outside stairway. We walked down to a side yard which was surrounded by a tall rock wall. The soldier stood by the entrance. Pablo nodded for me to walk with him around the borders of the yard. As we walked, Pablo bent down several times to pick some of the flowers growing in beds by the wall. What else does the seventh insight say? I asked. He bent down and picked another flower. It says that not only dreams guide us, also thoughts or daydreams guide us. He bent down and picked another flower. It says that not only dreams guide us, sorry. Yes, Father Carl said that. Tell me how daydreams guide us. They
So now
show
again
us.
over here, what is happening? Okay. So he clearly says not only dreams, but also daydreams. So when you're daydreaming, you're shifting into an altered state. Now children do that a lot and they are reprimanded for doing that. Having said that, they need to actually cultivate that attitude of daydreaming because it's automatically taking them to an alpha state of consciousness, which is very relaxed, and you can actually start connecting with intuition in that state.
Yes, Father Carl said that. Tell me how daydreams guide us. They show us a scene, a happening, and this is an indication that this event might happen. If we pay attention, then we can be ready for this turn in our lives. I
So
looked
now
at him.
again, what happens? We have to pay attention. So what is the daydream telling us? What is the dream telling us? When we pay attention, then it starts to work for us. It's like any other faculty or any other, like, whatever exercise you do, you slowly start becoming more and more proficient at.
I looked at him. You know, Pablo, an image came to me that I would run into Marjorie. Then I did. He smiled. A chill went up my spine. I must indeed be in the right place. I had intuited something that had come true. I had thought several times of finding Marjorie again, and now it had happened. The coincidences were taking place. I felt lighter. I don't have thoughts like that happen very often, I said. Pablo looked away, then said, the seventh insight says that we all have many more such thoughts than we realize. To recognize them, we must take an observer position. When a thought comes, we must ask why. Why did this particular thought come now? How does it relate to my life questions? Taking this observer position helps us to release our need to control everything. It places us in the flow of evolution.
So what is this? A witness attitude. You cannot take a right decision if you are in the soup. Okay, to take a right decision, you have to get out of the soup. You have to take a step back and then view the scenario from an overview to take any kind of decision that you are making. Okay, so becoming an observer, becoming a witness, becoming aware again becomes very, very important. And plus, again, all these questions. Why has this thought come to me right now? What is the reason why it has come? or some kind of a incident takes place. Why is that incident taking place with me right now? What is it trying to convey to me? These are introspective thoughts that we must have if we are wanting to engage the flow.
But what about negative thoughts? I asked. Those fear images of something bad happening, such as someone we love getting hurt, or of not achieving something we very much want? Very simple, Pablo said. The seventh insight says that fear images should be halted as soon as they come. Then another image, one with good outcome, should be willed through the mind. Soon, negative images will almost never happen. Your
So again, over here,
intuitions,
okay, so what is it saying? That anything that is depleting, you need to cut it as soon as it comes. Okay, so in the Gita talks, he says, nip it in the bud, deplete or get rid of or drop anything that is putting you on the left side of the grid, because anything negative which is coming into your consciousness is operating from the left side of the grid. So get rid of it and then replace it with a positive thought, an uplifting thought. So again, it's the same process of shifting from the left side of the grid to the right side of the grid, and we need to build many strategies to be able to do that. So it says over here, then another image, one with a good outcome, should be willed through the mind. So we connect to a uplifting thought or an uplifting outcome from whatever we are experiencing, and get rid of that thing which is putting us into a depleted state of consciousness.
the seventh insight says that fear images should be halted as soon as they come. Then another image, one with good outcome, should be willed through the mind. Soon, negative images will almost never happen. Your intuitions will be about positive things. When
So
negative
now
images
again,
come,
1 second. So now again over here, it's like building muscle memory. What comes into your field, something that you resonate with. So as soon as you start focusing on resonating with uplifting things, that is what will start coming into your intuitive ability rather than the depleting things. When you start out, because we are all tuned to look for protecting ourselves, the flight and fight response is so totally ingrained into us, because that's part of the reptilian brain, look after yourself, always be aware, wary of anything happening, because you're constantly under threat. Okay, that thing kicks in first, and then over a period of time you need to become aware of it and then transcend it. So it's something that you need to cultivate and learn for yourself.
your intuitions will be about positive things. When negative images come after that, the manuscript says they should be taken very seriously and not followed. For instance, if the idea comes to you that you're going to have a wreck in a truck and someone comes along and offers you a ride in a truck, then do not accept it.
So again, it's a matter of becoming aware. Okay. And then you see, when we are always in the uplifting thoughts, if something negative is coming, then naturally you need to pay attention to it, because it is out of the blue. It is something which is not the normal norm. So anything that stands out, we always need to pay attention to.
We had come full circle in our walk around the courtyard and were approaching the guard. Neither of us talked as we passed him. Pablo picked a flower and I took a deep breath. The air was warm and humid, and the plant life outside the wall was dense and tropical. I had noticed several mosquitoes. Come, the soldier suddenly called out. He prodded us inside and down to our cell. Pablo entered ahead of me, but the soldier put his arm up, blocking my way. Not you, he said, then nodded for me to walk down the hallway and up the other steps and outside through the same door we had entered the night before. In the parking lot, Father Sebastian was entering the back seat of a large car. A driver shut the door behind him. For an instant, Sebastian looked at me, then he turned and said something to the driver. The car sped away. The soldier nudged me towards the front of the building. We walked inside and into an office. I was directed to sit in a wooden chair across from the white metal desk. Within minutes, a small sandy haired priest of about 30 entered and sat at the desk without acknowledging my presence. He looked through a file for a full minute, then looked up at me. His round, gold rimmed glasses produced an intellectual appearance. You've been arrested with illegal state documents, he said matter of factly. I'm here to help determine whether prosecution is in order. I would appreciate your cooperation. I nodded. Where did you get the translations? I don't understand, I said. Why would copies of an old manuscript be illegal? The government of Peru has its reasons, he said. Please answer the question. Why is the church involved? I asked. Because this manuscript contradicts the traditions of our religion, he said. It misrepresents the truth of our spiritual nature. Where? Look, I said, interrupting. I'm just trying to understand this. I'm just a tourist who got interested in this manuscript. I'm a threat to no one. I only want to know why it is so alarming. He looked puzzled, as if trying to decide the best strategy for dealing with me. I was consciously pressing for details. The church feels the manuscript is confusing to our people, he said carefully. It gives the impression that people can decide on their own how to live without regard to the scriptures. Which
So, so,
scriptures?
so now again, it becomes a power game. If people are not regarding the scriptures, then the power gets taken out of the church, because the church is what who interprets the scriptures.
Which scriptures? The commandment to honor thy father and mother for one. What do you mean? The manuscript blames problems on parents undermining the family. Sorry. The manuscript blames problems on parents undermining the family. I thought it spoke of ending old resentments, I said, and finding a positive view of our early life. No, he said, it is misleading. There should never have been a negative feeling to begin with. Can't parents be wrong? Parents do the best they can. Children must forgive them. But isn't that what the manuscript is clarifying? Doesn't forgiveness take place when we see the positive about our childhoods? His voice rose with anger. But from what authority does this manuscript speak? How can it be trusted? He walked around the desk and stared down at me, still angry. You don't know what you're talking about, he said. Are you a religious scholar? I think not. You're direct evidence of the kind of confusion this manuscript evokes. Don't you understand that there is orders in the world only because of law and authority? How can you question the authorities in this matter? I said nothing which seemed to infuriate him even more. Let me tell you something, he said. The crime you have committed is punishable by years in prison. Have you ever been in a Peruvian prison? Does your Yankee curiosity yearn to find out what our prisons are like? I can arrange that. Do you understand? I can arrange that. He put his hand over his eyes and paused, taking a deep breath, obviously trying to calm down. I am here to find out who has copies, where they are coming from. I will ask you one more time. Where did you get your translations? His outburst had filled me with anxiety. I was making my situation worse with all my questions. What might he do if I failed to cooperate? Still, how could I implicate Father Sanchez and Father Carl? I need some time to think before I answer you, I said. Momentarily, he looked as if he might fly into another rage. Then he relaxed and looked very tired. I will give you until tomorrow morning, he said, motioning for the soldier standing in the doorway to take me. I followed the soldier back down the hall and directly to the cell. Without saying anything, I walked over and lay down on my cot, feeling exhausted myself. Pablo was looking out the barred window. Did you talk to Father Sebastian? He asked. No, it was another priest. He wanted to know who gave me the copies I had. What did you say? Nothing. I asked for time to think and he gave me until tomorrow. Did he say anything about the manuscript? Pablo asked. I looked into Pablo's eyes and this time he did not lower his head. He talked a little about how the manuscript undermines traditional authority, I said. Then he started raving and threatening me. Pablo looked genuinely surprised. Did he have brown hair and round glasses? Yes. His name is Father Custos, Pablo said. What else did he sorry. What else did you say? I
Okay,
disagreed.
I think we need to stop here. It's already 3:19. So let's stop here. Or you want to end the page, Shivangla?
Let's end the page.
Okay, go ahead.
I disagreed with him on whether the manuscript undermines tradition, I replied. He threatened me with prison. Do you think he meant that? I don't know, Pablo said. He walked over and sat on his cot across from me. I could tell he had something else on his mind, but I was so tired and scared that I closed my eyes. When I awoke, Pablo was shaking me. Time for lunch, he said. We followed a guard upstairs and were served a plate of gristly beef and potatoes. The two men who we saw earlier came in after us. Marjorie wasn't with them. Where is Marjorie? I asked them, trying to whisper. The two men looked horrified that I would speak to them, and the soldier stared at me intensely. I don't think they speak English, Pablo said. I wonder where she is, I said. Pablo said something in response, but again I wasn't listening. I suddenly felt like running away and was picturing myself fleeing down a street of some kind, then ducking through a doorway to freedom. What are you thinking about? Pablo asked. I was fantasizing about an escape, I said. What were you saying? Pablo said, don't dismiss your thought. It may be important. What kind of escape? I was running down an alley or a street, then through a doorway. I got the impression I was successfully escaping.
Okay.
You can stop here.
Yeah, we can stop. Okay, anyone, anything?